The dust storm had been raging for 3 days when Penelope Parker realized her father was never coming back from the mine. She stood at the window of their rented room above the general store in Evanston, Wyoming territory, watching the brown clouds swallow the mountains whole, and felt the last thread of hope snap inside her chest. Her fingers gripped the windowsill until her knuckles turned white, the rough wood biting into her palms. It was May of 1876, and she was alone in a place that seemed determined to kill her. The money had run out 2 days ago. The landlord, a thick-necked man named Grimes, had already knocked twice that morning, his fist rattling the thin door in its frame. Penelope had pressed herself against the wall and held her breath until his heavy footsteps retreated down the stairs. She was 21 years old, 1,000 miles from Boston, and she had exactly $3 to her name. Her father had promised her a new life out west. He had spoken of opportunity, of silver mines that would make them rich, of a fresh start after her mother's death. Instead, he had dragged her across the country to this God-forsaken territory and disappeared into a hole in the ground. The mine foreman had come himself to deliver the news, his hat in his hands, his eyes on his boots. Cave in. 5 men dead, her father among them. Penelope turned from the window and surveyed the sparse room. 2 narrow beds, a washstand, a trunk containing everything she owned. She had sold her mother's jewelry to pay for the journey west. She had sold her good dresses in Cheyenne when they needed food. She had nothing left to sell except herself, and she would rather die. The storm broke that afternoon, the wind dying as suddenly as it had begun. Penelope waited until dark, then gathered what she could carry and slipped down the back stairs. She had no plan except to keep moving, to put distance between herself and Grimes and his grabbing hands. She had seen the way he looked at her, had heard him outside her door at night, testing the lock. The street was empty, the shops shuttered, lamplight spilling from the saloon at the far end of town. Penelope kept to the shadows, her worn boots silent in the settled dust. She had nearly reached the edge of town when a hand closed around her arm. "Going somewhere, Miss Parker, Grimes." His breath was hot and sour with whiskey, his grip crushing. Penelope tried to pull away, but he yanked her closer, his other hand reaching for her waist. "You owe me rent," he said, "but I am willing to discuss alternative payment. Let me go." Penelope drove her heel down on his instep and twisted hard. Grimes cursed and released her, and she stumbled backward, her bundle falling to the dirt. She turned to run and crashed directly into something solid and unyielding. Strong hands steadied her, holding her upright. Penelope looked up into the face of a stranger, backlit by the saloon lights. Tall, broad-shouldered, a dark hat shadowing his features. She opened her mouth to apologize or scream. She was not sure which. "This man bothering you, miss?" The voice was low and calm, with a hint of something southern in the vowels. The hands on her shoulders were gentle but firm. "She is my tenant," Grimes sputtered, advancing. "This is none of your concern, Anderson." "That's so." The stranger, Anderson, did not move. "Looked to me like the lady was trying to leave and you were preventing her." "That true, miss?" Penelope found her voice. "Yes, I want to leave." "You heard her, Grimes. Let the lady pass." Grimes' face darkened. "She owes me money, rent for the room." "How much?" $15. Penelope felt her heart sink. It might as well have been 1,000. The stranger reached into his pocket and produced a leather wallet. He counted out bills, then handed them to Grimes. "There. She does not owe you anything now, and I better not hear about you troubling her again." Grimes snatched the money and retreated, muttering curses under his breath. Penelope watched him go, her mind reeling. When she turned back, the stranger was picking up her fallen bundle, dusting it off. "Thank you," she managed, "but I cannot accept. I have no way to repay you. Did not ask you to. He handed her the bundle, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. Maybe 25 or 26, clean-shaven, with dark hair curling at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. Name is Ethan Anderson. I run a ranch about 10 miles north of here. Penelope Parker. She clutched her bundle to her chest. I am grateful, truly, but I cannot take charity. Not offering charity, offering a job if you want it. My housekeeper quit last month to get married, and the place is falling apart without her. I can offer room and board and $15 a month. It is honest work if you are interested. Penelope stared at him. It was too convenient, too perfectly timed. Men did not rescue strange women in the street and offer them jobs unless they wanted something in return. But as she looked into Ethan Anderson's steady gray eyes, she did not see the calculation she had seen in Grimes' face. She saw only patience and something that might have been kindness. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "Because you look like you need help, and because I need a housekeeper." That's simple enough. Nothing was ever that simple. But Penelope thought of Grimes, of the empty room, of the long nights with no food and nowhere to go. She thought of her father lying dead in a collapsed mine shaft, and her mother's grave back in Boston, and the fact that she was utterly alone. "When would I start?" she heard herself say. "Right now, if you want. I have a wagon around back. We can head out tonight, be at the ranch by morning." It was madness. She knew nothing about this man except his name, but staying in Evanston meant facing Grimes again, meant starving or worse. At least on a ranch she would have food and shelter. At least she would have a chance. "All right," Penelope said. "I will take the job." Ethan nodded once as if it had been settled all along. He gestured toward the alley. "Wagon is this way. You hungry?" "I have some jerky and biscuits in the pack." She was starving. She had eaten nothing but hardtack for 2 days. "Yes," she admitted, "I am very hungry." "Well, come on then. Let us get you fed and on the road." Penelope followed him through the darkened streets, her bundle clutched tight, her heart hammering in her chest. She had no idea if she was making the worst mistake of her life or the only choice that made sense. All she knew was that Ethan Anderson had kind eyes and a steady voice, and right now, that was all she had to hold on to. The wagon was a sturdy buckboard with 2 draft horses hitched and waiting. Ethan helped her up onto the bench seat, his hand warm through her sleeve, then swung up beside her. He unwrapped a cloth packet and handed her 2 thick biscuits and several strips of dried meat. Penelope tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out. She devoured the food while Ethan set the horses moving, the wagon creaking as they rolled north out of Evanston. "Sorry about your father," Ethan said after a while. "Heard about the cave-in. Terrible thing." Penelope swallowed. "You knew him?" "Not well. Saw him around town a few times. He seemed like a good man." "He was a fool." The words came out harsh and bitter. "He dragged me out here chasing dreams that did not exist, and now he is dead and I am stuck in this horrible place." Ethan was quiet for a moment, the reins loose in his hands. "Wyoming is not for everyone," he said finally. "It is hard country, unforgiving, but it is not horrible. It has its own kind of beauty if you are willing to see it." Penelope looked out at the darkness, at the vast empty spaces stretching away on all sides. She could see nothing beautiful about it. It was cold and harsh, and it had taken everything from her. "I do not see it," she said. "Maybe you will. Give it time." They rode in silence after that, the wagon wheels grinding over the rutted road, the stars bright and cold overhead. Penelope wrapped her shawl tighter and tried not to think about what she was doing, where she was going. She was too tired for second thoughts, too wrung out for fear. She let the motion of the wagon lull her, and eventually her eyes drifted closed. She woke to the smell of coffee and the pale gray light of dawn. The wagon had stopped. Penelope sat up, disoriented, and realized she was covered with a thick wool blanket that had not been there before. Ethan was crouched beside a small fire a few yards away, pouring coffee from a battered tin pot. "Morning," he said when he saw her stirring. "We are about halfway there. Figured we could take a break, let the horses rest." Penelope climbed down from the wagon, her muscles stiff and aching. She looked around and caught her breath. They were in a wide valley, with mountains rising blue and purple in the distance, their peaks still dusted with snow. The grass was green and lush, dotted with wildflowers, and a creek ran silver through the middle of it all. The sun was just breaking over the eastern ridge, painting everything gold. "Oh," Penelope said softly. Ethan handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Told you, it has its moments." She took the cup, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. The coffee was strong and bitter, and the best thing she had tasted in days. "I have never seen anything like this. Wait until you see the ranch. It is even better." They shared a breakfast of more biscuits and some dried apples, then climbed back into the wagon and continued north. Ethan talked as they rode, pointing out landmarks, telling her about the ranch. He had inherited it from his uncle 3 years ago, he said, and had been building it up ever since. He ran cattle mostly, a few hundred head with the help of 2 ranch hands. It was not a huge operation, but it was growing. "Why did your housekeeper leave?" Penelope asked. "Like I said, she got married. To one of my ranch hands, actually. They moved down to Laramie to start their own place." He glanced at her. "I have been trying to manage the house myself, but I am not very good at it. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. I can rope a steer and brand a calf, but I cannot make a decent biscuit to save my life." Penelope almost smiled. "I can cook. My mother taught me. I can clean and sew and manage a household. Then we will get along fine." They reached the ranch just after noon. It sat in a sheltered valley, protected by low hills on 3 sides, with the creek running through the eastern pasture. The house was a solid log structure with a wide porch and a stone chimney, flanked by a barn, a stable, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, red and brown shapes against the green grass. It was rustic and rough around the edges, but it was clean and well maintained, and Penelope felt something loosen in her chest at the sight of it. "Home," Ethan said, setting the brake and hopping down. He came around to help her, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her to the ground. "Let me show you around." The house was spacious and well built, with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a sitting room with a fireplace. It was also, as Ethan had warned, in desperate need of a woman's touch. Dust lay thick on every surface, dishes were piled in the dry sink, and the floor looked like it had not been swept in weeks. "I know," Ethan said, seeing her expression. "It is bad, but if it was clean, I would not need a housekeeper, would I? Where will I sleep?" Penelope asked. "There is a room off the kitchen. Used to be the housekeeper's quarters. It is small, but it has a good bed and a window. You will have your privacy." He showed her the room, a simple space with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for storage. It was plain but clean, and after the cramped room above Grimes' store, it felt like a palace. Penelope set down her bundle and turned to find Ethan watching her from the doorway. "Is it all right?" he asked. "It is perfect, thank you." He nodded, then stepped back. "I will let you get settled. Take your time. We eat supper around 6, nothing fancy. I will introduce you to the ranch hands then." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Penelope stood alone in the quiet room and felt tears prick her eyes. She did not let them fall. She had cried enough over the past week, had spent enough time feeling sorry for herself. Instead, she unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin, and went out to survey the kitchen. It took her the rest of the afternoon to make the place habitable. She scrubbed the dishes, swept the floor, wiped down the counters and the big iron stove. She found a pantry stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, salt pork, beans, dried fruit. She found eggs in the henhouse out back and milk in the cold cellar. By 6 o'clock, she had a pot of beans simmering on the stove, fresh biscuits baking in the oven, and a pitcher of cold milk on the table. Ethan came in as she was setting out plates, his boots loud on the clean floor. He stopped and stared around the kitchen, his eyes wide. "You did all this in one afternoon. It is what you hired me for, is it not?" Penelope wiped her hands on her apron. "Supper will be ready in a few minutes. It smells incredible." He took off his hat and hung it by the door. "The boys are washing up. They will be real glad to have a decent meal for once." The boys turned out to be two cowboys in their early 20s, both lean and sunburned, with shy smiles and polite manners. Ethan introduced them as Jesse and Cole. They shook Penelope's hand with exaggerated gentleness, as if afraid she might break, then sat down at the table and ate 3 helpings each, praising every bite. "Best biscuits I have had since my mother's," Jesse declared, reaching for his 4th. "Better than the sawdust Ethan has been feeding us," Cole added with a grin. Ethan shook his head, but he was smiling. "I told you I could not cook." After supper, the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, and Penelope cleared the table while Ethan banked the fire in the stove. The kitchen was warm and peaceful, the evening light slanting through the windows. Penelope found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks, the steady rhythm of the work soothing her frayed nerves. "You settling in all right?" Ethan asked, drying the last of the dishes. "Yes. Everyone has been very kind." "Good." He hung the towel on its hook. "If you need anything, just let me know. I want you to be comfortable here." Penelope looked at him, at his honest face and his steady eyes, and felt a flicker of something she could not quite name. Gratitude, maybe, or relief. Or something deeper, something she was not ready to examine. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything. I know I have already said it, but I mean it. You saved my life back there." Ethan shook his head. "Just did what anyone would do." "No, not anyone. Most people would have walked on by." "You did not have to help me, but you did. I will not forget that." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on hers. "You looked like you needed a friend, and I figured I could use one too." The simple honesty of it touched something in Penelope's heart. She had been alone for so long, had been fighting so hard just to survive, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be valued for something other than what she could provide. "Then I am glad we found each other," she said. Ethan smiled, a slow, warm smile that changed his whole face. "Me too." The days fell into a rhythm after that. Penelope rose before dawn to start breakfast, cooked 3 meals a day, kept the house clean, mended clothes, tended the vegetable garden behind the house. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and she found satisfaction in it. The ranch was a world unto itself, isolated and self-sufficient, and she began to understand what Ethan had meant about Wyoming having its own kind of beauty. She also began to understand Ethan himself. He was a quiet man, thoughtful and deliberate, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her. He worked from sunup to sundown, mending fences, branding calves, breaking horses, doing the 1,000 tasks that kept the ranch running. But he always made time to check on her, to ask if she needed anything, to bring her wildflowers from the meadow or a trout he had caught in the creek. He was kind without being overbearing, respectful without being distant. He treated her like an equal, valued her opinions, listened when she spoke. It was so different from the way her father had been, always distracted, always chasing the next dream. And it was nothing like the other men she had encountered in Evanston, with their leering looks and grasping hands. Penelope found herself watching for him during the day, listening for his step on the porch, looking forward to the quiet evenings when they sat on the porch together and talked while the sun set behind the mountains. She told him about Boston, about her mother and her childhood, about her love of books and her dreams of becoming a teacher. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his years as a trail driver before he inherited the ranch, about his hopes of building something lasting, something worth passing on. "You ever get lonely out here?" Penelope asked one evening, a month after her arrival. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant peaks. "Sometimes," he admitted. "It is a big country and it is easy to feel small in it, but I have the ranch and the work, and now I have you here, which makes it better." Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "I am glad I came. I was terrified that first night, but now I cannot imagine being anywhere else. You were brave. Leaving town with a stranger, trusting me, that took courage. I did not have much choice. You always have a choice. You could have stayed, could have tried to make things work with Grimes or found some other way. But you took a chance on something better. That is brave." Penelope looked at him, at the strong lines of his profile, the way the fading light caught in his dark hair. She realized with a start that she was falling in love with him. It was not sudden or overwhelming, but a slow, steady warmth that had been building for weeks, fed by 100 small kindnesses, 1,000 quiet moments. The realization terrified her. She had sworn she would never let herself depend on anyone again, never let herself be vulnerable. But here she was, her heart opening despite all her defenses, drawn to this quiet cowboy with his gentle hands and his patient eyes. She looked away, afraid he would see too much. "I should check on the bread. I left dough rising for tomorrow." "Penelope." His hand closed over hers, warm and calloused. "Wait." She froze, her heart hammering. Ethan was looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath, his gray eyes searching hers. "I know you have been through a lot," he said quietly. "I know you have every reason to be cautious, but I want you to know that you are safe here, with me. I would never hurt you, and I would not let anyone else hurt you either. You are not just my housekeeper, you are my friend. And I value that more than I can say." Penelope felt tears sting her eyes. "I value it too, I value you." His hand tightened on hers, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Good. That is good." They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, the silence comfortable and charged all at once. Then Ethan released her and stood, his movements careful as if he were afraid of startling her. "I will let you get to that bread," he said softly. "Good night, Penelope." "Good night, Ethan." She watched him walk toward the barn, his tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky, and pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palm. She was in trouble, deep trouble, and she did not know what to do about it. The summer unfolded in a series of golden days. Penelope settled into life on the ranch as if she had been born to it, her initial fear and uncertainty melting away. She learned to milk the cow, to gather eggs without getting pecked, to read the weather by the shape of the clouds over the mountains. She learned the names of the cattle, the quirks of the horses, the best places to find wild strawberries along the creek, and she learned Ethan. She learned that he hummed when he was working, low and tuneless. She learned that he was afraid of thunderstorms, though he would never admit it, and that he had a weakness for apple pie. She learned that he read poetry in the evenings when he thought no one was watching, and that he wrote letters to his mother in Texas every Sunday. She also learned that she was not the only one whose feelings were growing. She caught him watching her when he thought she was not looking, his expression soft and wondering. She saw the way his face lit up when she brought him coffee in the barn, the way he found excuses to be near her, to help her with tasks she could easily have done herself. It was Jesse who finally said something. He cornered her in the kitchen one morning when Ethan and Cole were out checking the herd. "He is sweet on you," the young cowboy said without preamble, his face earnest. "In case you have not noticed." Penelope felt her cheeks flame. "I do not know what you mean." "Sure you do, Ethan. He is sweet on you, has been since the day he brought you here, and unless I am blind, you are sweet on him too." Penelope busied herself with the bread dough, kneading harder than necessary. "That is none of your business." "Maybe not. But Ethan is a good man, Miss Parker. Best man I know. And he has been alone a long time. It would make me real happy to see him happy. Just thought you should know." He left before she could respond, his boots echoing on the porch steps. Penelope stood at the work table, her hands covered in flour, her heart in her throat. Was it so obvious? Could everyone see what she was feeling? More importantly, what was she going to do about it? The answer came sooner than she expected. It was late July, the air heavy and hot, the sky bruised purple with an approaching storm. Penelope was hanging laundry when the first drops began to fall, fat and warm. She grabbed the basket and ran for the house, but the rain came faster, a sudden deluge that soaked her to the skin in seconds. She burst through the kitchen door, laughing and breathless, and nearly collided with Ethan. He caught her, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. They stood like that, dripping on the clean floor, the rain roaring on the roof overhead. "You are soaked," Ethan said, his voice rough. "So are you." He had been out in the storm too, his shirt plastered to his chest, his hair dripping into his eyes. He was looking at her with that intensity again, that searching gaze that made her feel seen all the way through. "Penelope," he said, and his voice was different, urgent. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He took a breath, his hands still on her shoulders. "I did not just bring you here to be a housekeeper. I mean, I did need help with the house. But that was not the only reason. I saw you in town and you looked so lost, so alone. And I wanted to help you. I wanted to give you a place where you could feel safe, where you could be yourself." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. "Why?" "Because I saw something in you, something strong and brave and beautiful. And I could not just walk away. I know it was presumptuous, I know I had no right, but I do not regret it. Not for a second. Because having you here, getting to know you, it has been the best part of my life, and I am falling in love with you. I think I have been falling in love with you since that first night, and I needed you to know." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Penelope could barely breathe. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such naked vulnerability. No one had ever looked at her the way Ethan was looking at her now, like she was precious, like she was everything. "Ethan," she whispered, "I am falling in love with you too. I have been trying not to, trying to protect myself. But I cannot help it. You make me feel safe. You make me feel like I belong somewhere for the first time in my life." His hands tightened on her shoulders, his eyes searching hers. "Do you mean that?" "Yes, I mean it with all my heart." He kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that tasted of rain and promise. Penelope melted into him, her hands fisting in his wet shirt, her whole body trembling. It was her first kiss, and it was perfect, everything she had ever dreamed a kiss could be. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. "I will court you properly," Ethan said, his voice low and fierce. "I will do this right, and when you are ready, if you are willing, I will marry you. I will spend the rest of my life making you happy, making you feel safe and loved. I promise you that." "I am ready now," Penelope said, her hands cupping his face. "I do not need a long courtship. I know what I want. I want you. I want this life, this place. I want to build something with you, something lasting. Ethan kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close. "Then we will do it together. You and me. A haven right here." The storm raged outside, lightning flashing, thunder rolling across the valley. But inside, wrapped in Ethan's arms, Penelope felt only warmth and peace. She had come to Wyoming expecting harshness, expecting to be broken by the frontier. Instead, she had found a home. She had found love, and she had found a future worth fighting for. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Evanston. Penelope wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Ethan had brought back from town, a soft blue cotton that matched the Wyoming sky. Ethan wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving hers as they exchanged vows. Jesse and Cole stood up for them, grinning like fools, and the preacher pronounced them man and wife. The ride back to the ranch felt different, charged with new possibilities. Penelope sat close to Ethan on the wagon seat, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, and she thought she had never been so happy in her entire life. "Nervous?" Ethan asked as they turned onto the ranch road. "No," Penelope said, and she meant it. "I trust you. I am exactly where I want to be." He kissed the top of her head. "I am going to spend every day making sure you never regret this. I already know I will not." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered promises and gentle touches. Ethan was patient and careful, mindful of her inexperience, and Penelope felt cherished in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, the window open to let in the cool night air, and talked until the stars began to fade. "Tell me what you want," Ethan said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "For our future. For this place." Penelope thought about it, her mind filling with images. "I want to make this ranch a real home. I want to fill it with laughter and warmth. I want to have children if we are blessed with them. I want to grow old with you, watching the seasons change, building something that will last." "That sounds perfect. We will build it together." "What do you want?" she asked. "Everything you just said, and I want you to be happy. That is the most important thing to me. Whatever makes you happy, we will do it." Penelope turned in his arms, looking up at him in the darkness. "You make me happy. This life makes me happy. I never thought I could feel this way, so content, so at peace. You showed me that the frontier does not have to be harsh. It can be beautiful and full of possibility, as long as I have you." Ethan kissed her, slow and deep. "You will always have me. I promise you that." The first year of their marriage was a time of learning and growth. Penelope threw herself into making the ranch house a real home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting flowers around the porch, baking bread and pies that filled the house with warmth and wonderful smells. Ethan expanded the herd, bought more cattle, hired another ranch hand to help with the increased work. They faced challenges, of course. A hard winter that killed several head of cattle, a drought that dried up the creek for 3 weeks, a pack of wolves that had to be hunted down before they decimated the herd. But they faced everything together, united in their determination to make the ranch succeed, and through it all, their love deepened. Penelope learned the rhythms of Ethan's moods, the way he withdrew into himself when he was worried, the way he needed quiet and solitude to think through problems. Ethan learned that Penelope was stronger than she looked, that she had a core of steel beneath her gentle exterior, and that she would fight fiercely for the things she loved. They also learned to laugh together, to find joy in small things. Ethan taught Penelope to ride, and they spent Sunday afternoons exploring the ranch, racing across the meadows, picnicking by the creek. Penelope taught Ethan to dance, and they waltzed around the kitchen on winter evenings, laughing when they stepped on each other's toes. In the spring of their second year together, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening after supper, leading him out to the porch where the sunset painted the mountains gold and pink. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand. Ethan looked at her, his expression shifting from curious to concerned. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right. I am wonderful. Ethan, we are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then his expression broke into the widest, most joyful smile she had ever seen. He whooped and picked her up, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he said, setting her down gently, his hands framing her face. "We are going to have a baby. Penelope, that is the best news I have ever heard. You are happy." "Happy? I am over the moon. I am terrified and thrilled, and I cannot wait to meet this little person we made together." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Penelope suffered terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and her back ached constantly as she grew bigger. But Ethan was attentive and gentle, bringing her tea in the mornings, rubbing her feet in the evenings, taking over some of her chores when she was too tired to manage. "I am supposed to be taking care of the house," Penelope protested one morning when she found him making breakfast. "You are taking care of our baby. That is more important. Let me take care of you." The baby came in late October, during the first snowfall of the season. Penelope labored for 12 hours, attended by a midwife from town and comforted by Ethan, who refused to leave her side despite the midwife's protests that it was not proper for a husband to be present. "Proper be damned," Ethan said, holding Penelope's hand. "I am staying with my wife." And when the baby finally arrived, a healthy, squalling boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes, Ethan wept openly, pressing kisses to Penelope's sweat-dampened forehead. "You are amazing," he whispered. "You are the strongest person I know. Thank you. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas after Ethan's father, and he became the center of their world. Penelope had never known such love, such fierce protectiveness. She spent hours just watching him sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers, his perfect little face. And Ethan was a natural father, gentle and patient, singing to Thomas in the evenings, carrying him around the ranch in a sling Penelope had sewn. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, then a little boy who followed his father everywhere, wanting to help with the ranch chores. Penelope gave birth to a daughter, Emily, when Thomas was 3, and then another son, Daniel, 2 years after that. The house was full of noise and laughter, of muddy boots and scraped knees and bedtime stories. The ranch prospered, growing from a few hundred head of cattle to over 1,000. They built a new barn, expanded the house, hired more ranch hands. Jesse got married and brought his bride to live in a cottage they built on the eastern edge of the property. Cole eventually moved on, heading north to Montana to start his own place, but he visited every year and always stayed in the guest room Penelope kept ready for him. Through it all, Ethan and Penelope remained each other's anchor. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about their day, making plans for the future. They still danced in the kitchen when the children were asleep. They still laughed together, fought occasionally, made up with whispered apologies and tender kisses. "You ever miss Boston?" Ethan asked one evening when the children were grown and the house was quiet again. Penelope looked out at the valley, at the familiar shapes of the mountains, at the ranch that had become her whole world. "No," she said honestly. "This is home. This has been home since the day you brought me here. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. A place to belong, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. I would not trade this life for anything." Ethan pulled her close, his arm around her waist. "I feel the same. You turned this ranch into a haven. You made it more than just land and cattle. You made it a home. You made me whole." They stood like that, wrapped in each other's arms as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And Penelope thought about that terrified girl who had fled Evanston all those years ago, who had been so certain the frontier would destroy her. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this bone-deep contentment. But Ethan had seen something in her that she had not seen in herself. He had offered her safety and kindness when she had nothing. And in doing so, he had given her the chance to become the woman she was meant to be, strong and capable and loved. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and new challenges. Thomas grew into a fine young man and took over much of the ranch work, allowing Ethan to slow down a bit. Emily married a doctor from Cheyenne and moved away, though she visited often with her own growing family. Daniel decided to become a lawyer and went east for school, but he always came home for the summers, helping out on the ranch and regaling them with stories of his adventures. Ethan's hair turned gray, then white, but his eyes remained as sharp and kind as ever. Penelope's hands grew gnarled with age, but they were still capable, still busy with sewing and cooking and tending her beloved garden. They aged together, their love deepening with each passing year, their bond unbreakable. When Thomas turned 25, he brought home a bride of his own, a sweet-faced girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. Penelope watched them stand on the same porch where she and Ethan had courted all those years ago, saw the way Thomas looked at Sarah with the same wonder and devotion Ethan had shown her, and felt her heart swell with pride. "We did well," Ethan said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "We did," Penelope agreed, leaning back against him. "We built something worth having, something that will last." The ranch passed to Thomas when Ethan finally decided to retire, though retirement for Ethan mostly meant working fewer hours rather than stopping altogether. He still rode out to check the herd most mornings, still helped with branding in the spring and roundup in the fall. But he also made time for the things he loved: reading on the porch, fishing in the creek, spending long, lazy afternoons with Penelope, just talking and being together. "I have been thinking," Penelope said one afternoon as they sat by the creek, their feet dangling in the cool water. "About that first night you brought me here. I was so scared. I thought I was making the biggest mistake of my life." Ethan squeezed her hand. "And now I know it was the best decision I ever made, trusting you, letting you help me. I fought so hard to be independent, to not need anyone. But you showed me that needing someone is not weakness. It is strength. It is what makes us human." "You taught me the same thing," Ethan said. "I was so used to being alone, to handling everything myself. But having you in my life, building this with you, it made me realize that sharing the burden makes it lighter, and sharing the joy makes it sweeter." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the water burble over the rocks, watching the clouds drift across the blue Wyoming sky. This valley, this ranch, this life. It was everything Penelope had never known she wanted. And it was all because of the man sitting beside her, the cowboy who had seen her at her lowest and offered her a hand up instead of walking away. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Penelope leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling utterly at peace. The frontier had seemed so harsh when she first arrived, so unforgiving and cruel. But Ethan had shown her the truth. The land was hard, yes. It demanded strength and resilience. But it also offered freedom and beauty and possibility, and most importantly, it had given her Ethan, her partner, her love, her haven in every storm. Years later, When Penelope was in her 70s and Ethan was nearing 80, they sat on that same porch one evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Thomas and Sarah had given them 5 grandchildren. Emily had 4, and Daniel, who had finally settled down with a writer from New York, had just welcomed his first. The porch was crowded and noisy, full of laughter and chatter, and Penelope looked around at all the faces she loved and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. "Tell us the story again, Grandma," one of the youngest grandchildren begged, "about how you and Grandpa met." Penelope smiled and began the tale she had told 100 times before. How she had been running from a terrible man in Evanston, how she had crashed into a stranger who turned out to be the love of her life, how he had paid her debts and offered her a job and brought her to this ranch, how she had been terrified and lost, and he had shown her kindness and patience and love. "I thought the frontier was harsh," Penelope said, looking at Ethan, whose eyes were still as warm and steady as they had been that first night. "I thought it would break me. But your grandfather showed me I was wrong. He showed me that with the right person beside you, even the hardest places can become a haven. He showed me what it means to be truly loved." Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "And you showed me what it means to have a home. Not just a house or a piece of land, but a real home, filled with love and laughter and family. You gave me everything, Penelope. Everything that matters." The grandchildren sighed and grinned, and the adults exchanged knowing looks. And as the sun set over the mountains one more time, Penelope and Ethan sat hand in hand, their hearts full, their lives complete. They had built their haven together, stone by stone, year by year. And it would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love, the strength of commitment, and the beauty that can bloom even in the harshest of places when 2 people choose to face it together. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's stewardship, and the family grew and flourished. And every evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold, someone would sit on that porch and remember the story of Ethan and Penelope, the cowboy and the lost girl who found each other in the wild frontier and built a love that lasted a lifetime. It was a story worth telling, a story worth remembering, a story of hope and second chances, of finding home in unexpected places, of the transformative power of love. And it all began with a single act of kindness on a dusty street in Evanston, when a cowboy with kind eyes saw a woman in need and decided to help. That decision changed 2 lives forever and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Penelope passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, with Ethan holding her hand. He followed her 6 months later, his heart simply giving out one morning as he sat on the porch watching the sunrise. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a shared headstone that read, "Together forever, our haven complete." Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, and afterward they sat on the porch and told stories late into the night. Stories about Ethan's quiet strength and Penelope's fierce determination. Stories about the ranch and the life they had built. Stories about love that endured through hardship and joy, through seasons and years, through everything life could throw at it. And when Thomas stood to give the final toast, his voice was thick with emotion but strong with pride. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who showed us what it means to love completely, to work hard, to build something lasting. They came together when both were lost, and they found in each other exactly what they needed. They turned this ranch into a haven, not just for themselves, but for all of us. Their love was a gift, and we are all better for having witnessed it. May we all be so lucky as to find what they found." To Ethan and Penelope. To Ethan and Penelope, the family echoed, their voices rising into the night air. And somewhere in the darkness, if you listened very carefully, you might have heard the wind whisper a response, carrying with it the spirits of two people who had loved deeply, lived fully, and left the world better than they found it. The ranch stood for many more generations, a testament to the foundation Ethan and Penelope had laid. And every person who called it home knew the story of how it all began, of the cowboy who offered kindness when it was most needed, and the woman who found the courage to accept it. It was a love story for the ages, played out against the backdrop of the Wyoming frontier. A story of transformation and hope, of finding beauty in harsh places, of discovering that home is not a location but a person, a feeling, a choice you make every single day. Penelope had thought the frontier was harsh, that it would destroy her. But Ethan had shown her the truth, had shown her that with love and partnership, any place could become a haven. Together, they had built something extraordinary, something that would outlast them both. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the land or the cattle or the prosperity, but the love they had shared and the family they had created. A family bound together by stories and memories, by the example set by two people who had chosen each other when they both needed it most, and never let go. The sun rose and set over the Wyoming Valley, the seasons changed, the years passed. But the story of Ethan and Penelope remained constant, a reminder that even in the hardest of times, even in the most unforgiving of places, love could flourish. All it took was courage, kindness, and a willingness to see the beauty in what others might dismiss. The frontier could be harsh, yes, but it could also be a haven, a home, a place where dreams came true and love lasted forever. Ethan and Penelope had proved that beyond any doubt. And their story would be told and retold, passed down through the generations, as long as the ranch stood and the mountains rose blue and purple against the endless Wyoming sky. It was a story of the Wild West, but more than that, it was a story of the human heart, of its capacity for resilience, for hope, for love that transcends circumstance and endures through everything. And in a world that often seemed cold and cruel, it was a story worth remembering, worth celebrating, worth holding close. For in the end, we all need reminders that kindness matters, that love is real, and that even when we are lost and alone, there is always the possibility of finding someone who will see us, truly see us, and offer us their hand. Someone who will stand beside us through storms and sunshine, who will build a haven with us brick by brick, day by day, year by year. That was what Ethan and Penelope had done. And their story, their love, their haven would live on forever in the hearts of those who knew them, and in the very stones and soil of the ranch they had built together. The end of their earthly journey was just the beginning of their legend, a legend that would inspire countless others to seek their own havens, to build their own loves, to face the harsh realities of life with courage and hope, knowing that with the right person beside them, anything was possible. And so the story concluded as all great love stories should, not with an ending but with a continuation, with a legacy that would ripple outward through time, touching lives yet to come, reminding them all that love, true love, is the greatest adventure of all.